This is Social Justice Warrior Leadership Training, and I'm Reagan, your moderator for today. This is Dr. Samantha Joo, the founder of Platform, and this is Mariam, our guest speaker for today. How are you guys today?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Good. So today we're going to be talking about presence as a leader. So before we start, Mariam, I'd like to ask you what your social justice passion is.
Ooh, that's a tough one. What my social justice passion is? I think it just comes down to people treating each other properly. Pretty simple. So if there are any inequities, it's really important for us to speak up and make things better and address those inequities.
Are there any particular inequities that bother you more than others right now at this point?
Healthcare is a big one because I'm in New York City and we've probably lost 40,000, if not more people at this point to COVID. And so, and seeing how COVID impacted Black and brown bodies way more than it did white bodies. And it's just so important to see how healthcare is important for everyone and how it should be something that's available to everyone, regardless of their job or immigration status.
I think those are very important things, and that healthcare should be available to everybody. So the next question is, why is presence such an essential tool for a leader, and how have you had to use presence as a leader?
Presence is important, especially for a leader, because it shows that you care about everyone else who's in the room with you. And I think that's for leaders to not just walk in and talk and then leave. It's you walk in, you talk, and you also make space for others to speak as well, so you can hear about what's happening. And also, if you're practicing presence, you don't have your phone in front of you, or you're not checking email on your laptop. You're there in the moment and letting people know that their time is as important as your time. You also get to pick up on things that you might miss if you're not paying attention or if you're multitasking. So if you're in a meeting, whether it's a large staff meeting or a one-on-one meeting, you get to kind of sense the other person's energy if you're really paying attention, to see like, how are they doing, especially if they're not comfortable talking to you about how they're doing or what's happening.
So from your definition of presence, it's being present or engaged with what is happening at that moment. Is that correct?
It's so simple. Yeah, it's just being in that moment. That's it. Don't think about what just happened. Don't think about what's going to happen later. It's me right here with Sam and Reagan having this conversation. And I'm not thinking about anything else that I might have to do after this interview.
I'm curious. The reason I'm curious is because when you talk about the corporate world, having presence is dominating, taking over the space, or what Amy Cully was talking about, expanding your body language so that people think you have confidence. So people think that you're competent and people would receive you better or can see you as a leader than if you're just engaged in that moment. How do you make sense of this two very distinct perceptions of what it means to be present?
One just sounds like physical presence. And I guess if it's almost like two different topics for me. So there's physical presence, showing up in a room, almost like dominating a room. And then there's being present in whatever space you're in and making sure that you're being seen and heard, but others are also being seen and heard. And so I guess there's like the traditional sense, and then there's what's more important to me when I think about presence is, am I listening? Are others listening to each other? What kind of a conversation are we having? Is it a one-way conversation? Is this a three-way conversation, how are we responding as well? If a person's actually listening, you're going to respond to what you're hearing and not whatever you want to say, which I notice this a lot when I'm in public spaces, maybe not so much right now because of social distancing and what's happening in New York. But when I used to take the subway to work or wherever, or we would be at a restaurant and you have tables close to each other before, and you can hear what other people are saying. It's always so interesting to see how are people engaging with each other? Are they engaging with each other at all? So if a person says something, if the next person responds, or are they changing the topic and making it about themselves? It's like, that's so interesting to me, because it's like, oh, this sounds like a really good, healthy relationship, or this sounds like a one-way relationship where one person's doing all of the talking and the other person's just listening, kind of being supportive.
I want to talk to Reagan about this, because what I'm curious to know is, when you're in the room, who do you think is confident in that space? Is it someone who we're talking about who's engaged in the conversation back and forth? Or is it someone who takes over a conversation? I want to get her opinion because I'm curious how her response might be distinct from yours, Mariam.
Yeah.
Reagan, you're muted, so yeah.
I'd say that, in my opinion, the person who has the biggest presence is the person who's engaged and making the other person feel like they're being heard and that they have a space there.
Now, Reagan, I want you to think about this. The reason why is this: I've been in law spaces where they're very, I would say, accomplished men in academia. And you could sort of see the moment they walk in, they take over a conversation. And so what we normally, as a student, when I was younger, normally would think these people are capable and therefore they're the only ones who can speak, because what do I have to say when I'm just a student? And what do I have to add to the conversation when there's this man who has published 20, 30 books, and I haven't even written one article? And so therefore, my body language would say, I would go back almost to a corner, and I could feel myself becoming smaller and actually become extremely silent because I didn't feel comfortable raising my voice in that space. So to some extent, when I don't feel good about myself, my body shrinks and I cannot be as engaged. And so I'm just an observer, a passive observer. Is that how you see yourself in larger spaces? Because according to you guys, as long as I can be engaged, I'm being present. But what about those spaces where you feel like you don't know how to be engaged because you don't feel good about yourself? Insecurities. Comments?
Was this for Reagan? I think this was
Both
for
of you,
Reagan.
because I'm curious to know.
Reagan, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think there can be two parts of it, and there's different ways that you can show your presence depending on who you are. And say you're a quiet person, and then there's also a more outgoing person. I think they both have different levels of confidence depending on what subject matter that they're talking about or engaging in. So I think that it can go two different ways, and both are very equal and important to the conversation.
And it doesn't fall just on you either. You know, if I'm the person who has written all of these books and I'm in this room, I actually think as the leader, it will be my responsibility to make everyone feel comfortable to where if they feel small, hopefully I can help create some kind of environment where they still feel like their voice is important. And if they don't, especially if they're in a room where there are a lot of people and they like smaller settings, then I can approach them later. Again, like if I'm actually in the moment, I kind of will notice these things and talk to them individually after the meeting to check in and get their thoughts. It's providing an opportunity where it's not just everyone has to speak in this big group setting, but also, letting people know that one-on-one conversations are also really important and an option.
What you're saying, Mariam, and I think I want to tie to what Reagan is saying, is it is the responsibility of a leader to engage.
Yeah.
And so therefore, you do not think the person who dominates the conversation, takes over a room, whether they're recipient of this energy is either outspoken, what Reagan was talking about, people were a little bit more social, outspoken, as opposed to someone who is more quiet personality, that it is the leader's responsibility to reach out to the one who's quiet on one-to-one situation, and for who's outspoken, make them come to the occasion to sort of be more engaged with the conversation. But as you know, that's not always the case. So you're saying a leader who's not capable of engaging or bringing out these conversations is not capable. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, I'm not saying not capable, but when we talk about leaders, we're really talking about people with power, right? And how do you use that power in a room? Like for me, power should be shared. And so if I'm dominating a space, then I'm keeping all that power for myself and just asking others to listen, essentially. And so but like, that's not something I agree with. Like, I believe in shared leadership and shared power. So if I show up, I do not want it to be just me talking, because that for me is boring often, because I'm curious about other people. So yeah, I have opinions, I have things to say. But what I learned, especially recently, because I've been getting a little more involved with social media just because I'm home, and I think a lot of people are online more now than they were before, is like, even when I engage with certain posts from friends, I do get challenged, and I appreciate that because it makes me see a side that I wasn't aware of and that I wouldn't have come to on my own, if that makes sense. So it could be with the current elections or anything else. Does that make sense?
It completely makes sense. But that's not the space that I'm normally in. In a space where people want to be engaged, want us to share, and want us to have back and forth. I'm more in spaces, I used to be more in spaces where there is one dominant voice. And you're supposed to listen. And you're
And that's the
supposed to
issue.
follow through.
And that's the issue with academia, right? Because you mentioned academia
It's not
earlier.
just academia, it's the business world. When I was a manager in business, it's the same thing in there. And platform, because I work with such strong women, I've been more and more aware that the style does not work when I work with women, strong women. When I work in the business world, that's the model that is preferred. And so I go back and forth to figure out what is the better model to work with when you're leading people. And as you know, like with a lot of Asian Americans, they like strong voices because they're more passive. And so it's like, do I need to change the way I lead based upon the group I'm working with? Or should I always try to be more engaged with the community, period?
I think platform is an exception. So most nonprofits use power and practice power the same way for-profit companies use power the same way academia uses power. That's just the world and how it works right now. And I think Platform has a leader who is very compassionate and empathetic. She'll never admit it, but you are present when it comes to Platform members and trainers and anyone who's involved with Platform. So I think you've created an environment where we feel like we also have a voice, and whether we agree with you or not, are comfortable sharing our thoughts and know that, you know, we might not agree even once we're all done talking, but we respect each other's opinion, we respect each other.
Reagan, I'm curious. What Mariam is talking, do you find that in terms of the mutuality, do you find that in the school space? And if not, does it work for you if it's not mutual?
What do you mean by mutual in a school space?
Where they respect what you say and are able to change, whether it be the curriculum, the syllabus, the reading or conversation. Are teachers open to it? Are administrators open to some of the suggestions that you make? Or is it based upon this leader up here, students down here model?
I think it's definitely a mix of both, because there's the time that you can have your voice be heard in a certain class where it's acceptable, but then there's also the classes that you're there to just learn what they have to teach you, and you don't get a say in how that's done, or what their like what lessons or work they're giving you.
What works for you, Reagan?
I think that I like to be involved in the conversation because it keeps me engaged, and I don't feel like I have to just sit there and listen to a lecture where I might not be interested in, where they are asking questions and they're questioning why that your opinion is that, where you're able to speak your opinion.
Given those two different models, Mariam saying she feels more respect for those who there's some more engagement, more mutuality. Do you find yourself having more respect, not just being more engaged in the topic, but more respect? And do you feel that person has more presence in the room because of that?
Yes, I think so.
Well, you guys are never disagreeing with each other.
You know what's interesting, Reagan, is if I am in a room where there are people, say, junior to me, what I've learned is because we're so used to hierarchy, it starts with our families. You know, we're told to listen to our elders, we're told to listen to our parents, that when you actually come across someone who challenges hierarchy, including, and also actually in schools as well, you know, we're told to listen to our teachers. The assumption is always that people who are older know better, are wiser, and have our best interests. And what I've learned just working on domestic violence and sexual violence in the nonprofit world and working with survivors is that elders don't always have our best interests in mind. And so for me, I'm all about folks with less power in the room challenging those with more power, because we can't assume that the person with more power is the wiser one, or the better intentioned one. But the other thing is that, you know, when I do talk about shared leadership, because we're so used to hierarchy, people don't really understand what that means. And so I've seen folks take that little bit of power that's being shared and actually abuse it, just like someone who is a leader, because they don't know, you know, and especially if you feel powerless, or if you feel like you haven't had power ever, and all of a sudden you get a little taste of it, it feels good and you kind of want to hold on to it yourself. But what's really important is for us to dismantle these hierarchies and these oppressive systems and share everything, right? Share this power to better our communities, to better those around us. This is getting like very big picture, but I have sensed that people don't totally understand what shared leadership means, especially when they're junior and haven't really had the chance to practice power.
I'm curious because I'm really into this body language. When you guys are in a room, okay, you don't know people, right, Reagan? And someone walks in, they're larger than life. They walk in and you could just feel how they take over conversations in space. Do you think they project more confidence than someone who just walks in silently and just sort of falls into the background? I'm curious for both of you. What are your thoughts? Who exudes more confidence in that space?
Reagan, do you want to go first?
I think it's the person that walks into the room a little more confident and might be talking with others rather than the person sitting quietly observing. But I also think they have a certain amount of confidence because they're sitting there listening to others and respecting their opinions.
Oh, Reagan, I don't like you.
She doesn't mean that. And she tells me that all the time, Reagan. All the time.
Oh, I'm serious. There are people who walk into the room. They just have that language saying, I know more, I have more power, I have more money. And so you feel it because they bring that energy in. And the people who walk in quietly, you don't sense as much.
I don't agree that the loudest person is the more confident.
Not loud, but like if Oprah walked into the room as opposed to Reagan, let's say, there's a difference. Yes or no?
I don't think it's a fair comparison. I really don't.
Someone like me walks into the room, but then I have a very confident body language, so that's not a good. Who can walk in?
I've heard several EDs at nonprofits talk about having the imposter syndrome. So even if you are a leader and even if you are doing most of the talking and getting most of the attention, that doesn't necessarily mean you are the most confident person in the room.
The initial impression.
I think for me, it depends on what they're saying.
Okay.
Is there any substance? I can listen to, so I got the thumbs up from you to bring up the election and political things. I was talking to someone at a store who told me he's Republican. I was pretty surprised because New York is not Republican, but that it's not 100% Republican. So I started to engage because I had the time and I was bored. And I was like, let's hear what this person has to say. And at one point we started talking about Ivanka Trump. And he was just like, what do you think about her involvement? And I told him that we were talking about experience and how a lot of people who are senior advisors do not have any relevant experience and got in those positions because their dad is the president. And so I think that's how Ivanka Trump actually came up. And he was like, well, what do you think about what she's been doing? Don't you think she's been helpful? And I told him that when she speaks, there's absolutely no substance. And there's no substance because she just doesn't have that deeper level of knowledge, right? I can talk about women's rights and use headlines for the entire conversation. And what I'm really saying is nothing. But if you are listening and you have some understanding of whatever knowledge or whatever topic, is being shared, you kind of pick up on okay, this is something new, or this is someone who knows what they're talking about, versus this person is also faking it until they make it, or hoping that whatever they're saying is convincing others that they know more than they actually know. So substance is really important. And it goes back to listening. How good of a job are you doing listening?
Reagan, do you know the imposter syndrome and the fake it till you make it? Okay. I want to come back because I have a couple of minutes. Reagan, do you think fake it till you make it, meaning, which is we're talking about having a body language that exudes confidence even though you're not, right? Do you think that's true, that we should fake it till we make it? Or should we lean in on our strengths and develop that and then have people believe in you?
We should use our strengths to kind of develop a more maybe like presumable confidence outwards. Even if we have the confidence inside, we may not show it on the outside. When we do, I think you may have to show it, like fake it a little bit more than you might have to if you already possess that confidence, just so you get some more people attention sometimes. But I think that there's some situations where you have to do that too, if that makes sense.
I think Mariam agrees with you because that's what we were talking about earlier. Sometimes you have to fake it.
It's also a gender thing. I know I just used Ivanka Trump as an example, but like, I want to say, even the EDs who have talked about having the imposter syndrome, I actually think they're more than qualified to be in their positions. And so maybe they feel like they need to fake it because they just don't think they've made it. And like, I think often many of us have made it, and maybe we have to fake it just to convince ourselves.
That's very interesting what you just noted, Mary. I think even though we are capable, a lot of women, they don't believe it. And so they feel like they need to fake it when they really don't need to, because everything they offer is good enough or more than enough. And I don't know how you get out of that insecurity. So that the insecurity does not translate well in your body. And it's try to figure out how we get over these insecurities so that the way I sit and talk and walk, I don't need to fake it because it shows naturally. I really believe if you're confident, it will show. And even if you're good, if you don't believe that you're good enough, that will show also in your body language as well. But I don't know how to convince, and this is a bigger question, how do you convince women that they're good enough?
Good mentorship helps. Having other strong, caring women around you, you know, when you need or when you're feeling low, you know, who do you surround yourself with? Are they lifting you up, or are they bringing you down just to lift themselves up?
That's great, Mariam. It is very important to have other. As I age, I'm realizing, because I didn't have good mentors, how pivotal that would have been in terms of my own development as a leader. That would have been extremely important. Reagan, Mariam, final thoughts or questions for each other, for me or anything?
I'm thinking more about the presence and the faking it till you make it thing. And I think at the end of the day, where really it's a reflection of how we feel about ourselves, not how we want other people to feel about ourselves. So if you're not, you can exude all this confidence, you can have all the power in the room, but if you don't actually believe that you have that confidence or that power or the ability, you're going to constantly do things to try to convince yourself that all of this exists.
So you're saying external perception is irrelevant?
I think it's a mirror to how you feel internally.
Okay. That's a great point. Reagan?
My last comment would be that you need to use your confidence in the right way. There's a right way to use it and a wrong way to use it, and you need to believe in yourself, that you'll use your confidence to lift people up and not to tear them down. You don't use your presence to lower people's self-esteem.
And I think what Reagan says is very important, because I think we can use confidence as a weapon, which is a form of arrogance. And when you cut down people, I don't care how capable you are. It's a form. When it's weaponized, it's counterproductive, and therefore unnecessary. And I don't care how much confidence you have, it's just wrong. So thank you for bringing that up, Reagan. I appreciate that. Thank you both for being in this space. I really appreciate your comments and insights. As much as I try to get you guys to see my way, you guys don't agree, which is fine. But thank you both.
Thank you. Nice meeting you, Reagan.
Thank you.